Welcome to the Hard Truth Podcast. This is Jeremy Fouts, and I'm excited for today's episode, as every episode, but today is something special as we are talking to a men's specialist, a men's midlife coach. Have been coaching for over 12 years, teaching men about masculinity, self-mastery, and purpose. I cannot wait for Frank to be on with you. Frank Paul Vignola out of New Jersey. It's good to have a different accent in here rather than a Texas accent, Frank. And Frank is also an author of Crafting Masculinity. And today he is going to be sharing with us the topic that he has actually chose to be talking about. And listen up, men, it's called menopause. I know a lot of times, Frank, us men, we love to give women, a hard time about going through that time in life of midlife crisis. But what's fascinating to me, I think us men struggle with that more than actually the women do. We let insecurities, a lot of different things paralyze us from really going to that next level in life. And that's what you've been known for in the last 12 years, is helping men out of that, a funk in life, helping them go to that next level. And it's an honor and a privilege to have you on the Hard Truth Podcast. A lot of podcasts probably wouldn't have you on because they don't talk about the truth. They try to talk about cheat codes and the things that is really not valuable in their life. But we're going to be talking about some really awesome things today. Thank you for being on all the way from New Jersey. Frank Paul Vignola, welcome to the Hard Truth Podcast.
Let's go.
Thank you, brother. It is an honor to be here, man. And I love the name of your podcast because that's a big part of my coaching style is You got to be willing to say the things that nobody else is going to say.
Absolutely.
Those are the hard truths, but they are the necessary truths. So
Absolutely.
I'm ready to get into it with you, brother.
Well, man, I'd love for you to give us a little bit more background on who you are, Frank, and a little bit let's just give a little bit of background of who you are, how you got here, and let's just jump right into the topic, talk about menopause and help these men really go to the next level.
Yeah, sure, brother. So I always start my story, my background story, with when I was a teenager and I was a delinquent, and I was one of those kids who was in the boys' homes, the residential centers, juvie. I was in rehab shelters all through the ages of 14 to 18. I was incarcerated for 4 years, and it was on that journey that I discovered that I liked coaching other people. Essentially, it was it's I didn't realize that I was a leader. I didn't know my strengths, and then I got connected with the right mentors in some of those programs that I was in, and they helped me discover some of my strengths and the fact that I was a leader. So I was 17 years old, and I was coaching and leading some of the group therapy meetings that we would have, and also we had a big brother program, and I was mentoring some of the newer residents that were coming into the program. So I always knew that I wanted to do this work. I always knew that it was a part of who I am, and this is back in the 90s because I'm a man of a certain age, and
We're both right there together.
And back then I don't really think there was such thing as a life coach. In fact,
No.
I'm pretty sure life coaching was maybe started being talked about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but not really in the 90s. So I knew that if I wanted to do the kind of work that I love doing, I was probably going to become a psychologist if I wanted to do that kind of work. So and then life coaching happened. And about 12 years or so ago, that's when I was like, okay, this is my calling. This is it. And back then, social media wasn't big. No. So, if anybody had heard of a life coach, they were just like, a what? They thought it was a gimmick. They were just like, oh, please, this is just a racket. They didn't believe in it. Now you throw a rock and you hit a life coach.
Absolutely.
That's how many there are. Yeah. But yeah, pre-social media, it was, I was kind of on my own to build this business and this idea. And I knew that I wanted to work with men. I knew that I did. And it started off with me working with guys in midlife and helping them get through midlife stagnation and help them get through what we might call a midlife crisis. But now what it's become is bigger than that. It's more
Right.
than simply, let's just get you through this struggle in your life. It's more like, let's take what was a struggle and let's actually turn it into the greatest season of your life. Now,
Yeah.
I think that that would surprise, that's what surprises most people about the work that I do, is that they think, can you just get me back to being in an okay place? And I'm like, not only can we do that, we can actually make this the best years of your life. That's the fucked up thing, Jeremy, is that a lot of guys are like, oh, I've peaked. I'm
Right.
40. I've already lived my best years. And I'm like, no, the fuck you haven't, brother.
Yeah.
No,
Hadn't even started.
absolutely not. You exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we can not just ramp up your life, but we could turn these into the most impactful and transformative years of your life. And that's what I set out to do. That's what
Yeah.
I set out to do with guys. Yeah.
Yeah. How many of those guys do you think has really never that you work with have never really achieved greatness? And then how many of them has maybe achieved greatness and then kind of become stagnant? And the reason I say that, Frank, is I dealt with the same thing. You know, I had a lot of success in my 30s. I retired on a ranch. I had the money, had the health, had the boys, my wife, everything, great relationship, but I kind of lost that fire and that passion. You know, I mean, have you saw working with these men? Is it a good mixture of people that maybe have never accomplished that greatness, or is it a bigger mixture of people that have achieved a little bit of greatness and think that's just where it's going to be, where it's going to end?
It's both. To answer your question, it's both. It's guys like what you just talked about, where they were maybe felt like they were crushing it in their 20s or maybe in their 30s, and then their fire starts to fade a little bit, and they're like, why do I feel stagnant? Why do I feel stuck? Why do I feel unfulfilled? And then I help them reignite that fire, and then we set shit ablaze, and we get them back into that space of greatness.
Right.
I'll use the word you used. And then there's guys who come to me where their greatness is dormant. They never discovered it. They never,
Right.
because they didn't have the self belief, or maybe they discovered a hint of it. Maybe in one area of life where they really, really shined in one area of life, but it hasn't really come alive in other areas of life. So, and that is maybe. Maybe about 2/3 is the guys who get to a point of stagnation, and then maybe a third is guys who are dormant. But I got a special place in my heart for the guys who their greatness is dormant, and it's because it reminds me of my story. It
Right.
reminds me of when I was in the boys' home and I had no self-belief whatsoever, and my masculinity, my greatness, my inner leader, my inner beast, badass, whatever you want to call it, inner alpha. He was just dormant. I had no idea he existed.
Right.
None whatsoever. So it took the right mentors to believe in me for me to find my self belief.
Right.
And that was really it. It was their belief in me that started convincing me, like, why do they believe in me so much? They're not just blowing smoke up my ass. After a
Right.
while, I started seeing, like, wow, they really believe in me. So that's what nurtured or fed that dormant beast inside me, and helped him come alive and bring out my greatness. So I try to do the same thing for those guys. Is I let them know how much I believe in them, and I
Yeah.
really try and nurture that dormant seed, because it just, for one reason or another, throughout the course of their journey, throughout the course of their life, the environment never nurtured it, and it just
Yeah.
stayed dormant. So they think it doesn't exist, but I
Right.
see it in them. Yeah.
Right. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, we was all made for greatness, right? I mean, I
Amen.
feel like nothing was done just because. I mean, we was all made for greatness, and having a coach like you make people realize that, man, that's life changing. Because you're right. Not a lot of people believe in their self, but they're looking for that mentor, that coach, to pull that out of them. When I
Yep.
used to work with a lot of people back in my 30s, I always tell them, if you don't have the belief, borrow mine until you have some.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's a good one. I might steal that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's my favorite thing to do. It's my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do. It's also incredibly frustrating at times when
Yeah.
you see that greatness in somebody and they just don't see it in themselves. They don't believe it yet. You want to
Yeah.
fucking shake them,
Yeah.
you know? So I used both approaches. I do the gentle approach with gentle hands, and I'm just like, bro, I love you, dude. Like, I believe in you. And then I do the tough love too, man. I'm
Yeah.
hard. I'm hard on my guys, but they all know it comes from a place of love. They all know
Absolutely.
that it's coming from a place of like, dude, I see greatness in you, and I will stop at nothing to
Yeah.
extract that out of you. Yeah.
Yeah. What is it that kind of, starts men down this midlife crisis? Is it emotional issues? Is it lack of courage? What are some of
Mhm.
the things that you see, and how can you help us get out of it? I mean, I'm definitely going to recommend every man going through this to hire a coach like you to reach out, because obviously this is what you do for a living. This is, you're a professional in this space,
Yeah,
and
man.
I'm a big believer in coaches. I have coaches myself. If
Me
my
too.
my boy wants to be a quarterback coach or be a quarterback, I'm getting him a quarterback coach. My boys got hitting coaches. I mean, they've got nutritionists that help us build plans. I mean, I'm a big believer in that. But what part is it that really is getting men in that point of their life where they feel like they can't do it anymore? I mean, and is it emotional issues that they're dealing with, courage?
It's a few different things, and it is emotional. When we hit midlife, we do go through emotional and psychological changes. We go through physical changes too, and that can impact. They're kind of mutually reciprocal. So, for example, the one of the physical changes we go through is, for most men, our testosterone drops.
Right.
And then when our testosterone drops, a lot of people don't realize how that impacts us. It's not just muscle mass; it's
Right.
also it's energy, it's libido, it's our
Right.
virility, it's our feeling of being a man, and it could lead to some depression. So it can
Right.
exacerbate some of the other emotional and psychological changes that happen. But just to get into some of those, one of the things that we do when we start entering midlife, say, after 35, approaching 40, we start becoming really reflective in our thinking. We start assessing our accomplishments. We might have lived life on autopilot thinking that we're young and we got time. But then as soon as 35 and like we start approaching for a lot of guys, it's 40. But as soon as that time hits, and it's a different year for each person, but around that time, when that hits, all of a sudden it's just like, whoa, okay, wait, hold up. Am I where I want to be in life? Am I as far along in my career as I wanted to be? Do I have the money that I was hoping to have at this point in time in my life? Um, what about my relationships? I'm still single, or am I in the right relationship? So that's one of them. Is we become really reflective. We start assessing our accomplishments. We start assessing our goals with a scrutinizing eye, because we hadn't really done that before. Maybe some of us have, but
Right.
for a lot of guys who hadn't, that's when they start doing it. And most of the time, they're disappointed. They're like, fuck. Because they weren't living life with the level of intentionality that they needed to be. They weren't thinking about their mortality.
Right.
So that's the first thing that changes. The second thing is we start questioning our identity. We start to question everything. Sometimes we even question our belief system. We question everything. We question our values. We question the choices that we made. Am I in the right career? Is this what I'm actually meant to be doing? Is this fulfilling? Am I in the right marriage? We question our choices. We question our values. That's one of the reasons why all of my guys, it's a non-negotiable. Anybody who signs up, they get a customized journey, but one of the non-negotiables is they're getting a comprehensive values assessment, because every man that I ask, do you know your values? They always say yes. And then I say, okay, cool. What are they? And they're not very good at rattling them off. And the thing is that they change. Our
Right.
values change. So that's the other thing that happens is questioning our identity. I would say the third biggest thing that happens is probably just stress and anxiety. It's stress and anxiety from the stagnation, is that we're wanting something to change in our life. We're wanting to feel the thrill and the fire that we felt in our 20s or maybe even in our early 30s, and we don't feel it anymore. And we're wondering why. But we're not doing anything about it because we're an autopilot and we have responsibilities. We're a husband, a father, an entrepreneur, a businessman, or just a working man. So there's no time for that shit, right?
Right.
And well, wrong, but that's the
Right.
story we tell ourselves. And that just leads to stress and anxiety because we're living day to day feeling unfulfilled. But this is ultimately, without getting too deep into the weeds on philosophy, which if you want me to tell me and I will, but these are ultimately the things that happen in addition to I guess probably the biggest thing, which is legacy. Am
Right.
I creating any lasting value? I'll touch on it real quick, and then
No,
you
let's
can
get into the weeds, man. Don't touch on
you
it.
get
Let's
into the
go
weeds.
there. Yeah,
All
because
right.
I mean,
All
when
right,
you
bro.
say that, Frank, it's like I work with a lot of men. I'm not a life coach. You know, I do it just men that reach out to me and say, "Hey, man, can I have help in this area?"
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the biggest things that I see in the men that I'm talking to is us as men. I don't think we're going to be fulfilled in life unless we know that that legacy is something of value and something of importance, and we know that our last breath we gave it our all.
Yeah.
And I watch so many men that coast and they don't have a clue what that legacy might be, and even if they do, they don't know how to achieve that. So let's go as deep as you want to go, because I feel like this episode is not only going to be valuable for the audience listening today, but we're going to push this out to a lot of men that are really struggling with this area.
Let's do it, brother. All right. You gave me the green light. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, getting into the philosophy side of it, so let's get into a little bit of so all right, let's start with Freud, or Freud's protege, Erikson. Everybody's heard of Freud, not everybody's heard of Erikson. Erik Erikson was Freud's protege, and what he did, he basically posits that the phases of life that Freud talked about, which I think is basically from birth to adolescence, or maybe through teens and early adulthood, but I know that it doesn't go all the way through the span of life.
Right.
Erickson posits that the phases of life that we go through actually go through the entire course, the entire duration of the lifespan. And what he says is that we hit a point in midlife, right around these years that I'm talking about, where it's generativity versus stagnation. And what that means is that one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to be generating something of lasting value that outlives us and outlasts us, or we're going to feel completely stagnant. And it's ultimately a choice. That's the good news. The
Right.
good news is that we're the problem and we're also the solution. But ultimately, we start thinking about our legacy. We start thinking about, am I generating, what is this life for? And everybody comes from different religious backgrounds and things like that. But whether you're a Christian, you're Muslim, or you're an atheist, I think every man at that point starts to think, what am I creating? What is my purpose here? Am I doing something purposeful? And we'll feel it. We'll feel it in our day to
Oh
day
yeah.
life. And if we don't, that's what creates the feeling of stagnation. It's, what am I creating? And sometimes we might actually be doing something that could create lasting value, but we're not aware of it.
Right.
We're not living our life with intention. We're not doing that thing because we know it's going to generate something of lasting value. So a lot
Right.
of times my journey with these guys is just letting them know, do you realize these are your values? This is what's important to you. Do you realize how much alignment is already in your life, but you're just not capitalizing it? You're not living with intentionality and recognizing that this is going to lead to this, is going to lead to this, is going to lead to that. And then once they become aware of it, everything changes. And then in other instances, people are living lives that are completely misaligned. But
Right.
ultimately, that's the inner conflict that we have. And I think men more so than women, not saying that women don't have that too, but I think that women tend to find purpose in family roles more so than men. Not saying that men don't at all, but I think a woman can find more purpose in motherhood or being a wife than a man can find in being a husband or a father. And again, that doesn't mean that they don't find any purpose in it, but I think that men feel a need to have a purpose and an identity outside of those roles, in addition to those roles. And I'm going to argue that in order for them to fully step into those roles and be a great husband and father, they actually need a purpose,
Right.
is that they need to be an exemplar. So that's what that phase of life is about. That's what Erickson posits. That's his philosophy. And I agree with it because I've seen it in the work that I do. The guys that come to me in their late 30s, 40s, early to mid 50s, they keep, the repeating theme is, I don't feel purposeful. I don't
Right.
feel fulfilled. I feel stagnant. And that's when I started doing the research. That's when I started pulling out the philosophy books, and I'm like, what is this about? And this is what I learned. And I'm like, this totally lines up. This
Right.
totally checks out with what I've been experiencing as a coach. So it was my job to come up with a solution. I was like,
Yeah.
I need to help them solve this. And that's where I started doing the values assessment, is I was like, we need to have men living in alignment with their values. Not only that, but they need to be implementing one or more of their greatest strengths. So they
Right.
need to be implementing their strengths, because when we do that, we feel purposeful,
Right.
because we're doing what we're great at. And then when we're doing it in a way that aligns with our values, now we're doing something that's important to us. We're doing what we're great at, which makes us feel like we have worth. We're doing it in a way that aligns with something that we love or something that's important to us. So it has meaning. Now we have purpose.
Right.
Now we have purpose. So strengths, values is my equation to purpose. And yeah, brother, it's really powerful. It's
Yeah.
really powerful to see somebody go in sometimes just a matter of a couple months from feeling completely stuck and stagnant to just coming alive and
Yeah.
feeling like they're living life like it's a mission.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't speak for the women, but I can see you're actually coaching me, whether you know it or not, here on this podcast, Frank. And the reason I say that, I'm sitting here thinking in deep thoughts as you're speaking, and I can see for a man, I made the money in my 20s and 30s. I thought I was going to retire young, so that's what you hear always, right? Oh, I'm going to
Sure.
make money and I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
And I had the money and I had what I thought was my dream ranch, but I was not fulfilled. And I think you're right on the fact of women, when like my boys are 17 and 15. So they're still holding on to that nest, the motherhood, getting
Yep.
ready for college. And then I'll watch a lot of times the readying in for grandkids and marriages and things like that. Whereas
Yeah.
men, when the kids get older, you're like, okay, my job was to provide and to protect. I feel
Right.
like I did that, but it's almost like, what else is there more? I mean, and I agree with you 100%. And that was the reason it brought me out of retirement. I wanted my boys to see me in my prime. I wanted them to see me in action. I wanted to see
Yeah.
them, or let them watch me how to go build something.
Yep.
How to hit the gym every morning, how to eat correctly, how to be a disciplined sucker, that they know that man is being an example. But I 100% agree with you. I think women, a lot of times, it's easier for them to find that assurance that, this is my home, this is my nest, this is my place to take care of. Where
Yeah.
men, when those kids get older, it's almost like they seem lost.
Yeah, and I love what you said about you wanted them to see what you were doing, because I think that's what a true leader or a true exemplar does, is we learn from what we see more than we learn from what we hear.
Right.
And I think especially when we're children, we
Right.
learn more from what we actually see than what we're taught, or what we're told, I should say. So when you have when these kids have a father that is that has a purpose outside of the role of a father,
Right.
outside of the role of a husband. Yes, it's to provide and to protect, but they also have a purpose that's
Right.
bigger than them. That they're thinking big picture. They're zooming out. They're thinking about society, mankind, the world. And the father has a purpose, and they serve a purpose in the work that they do. That's being an exemplar to your kids. And I think that even once the kids have left the nest and you no longer need to protect and provide for them, that's one of the ways that you can actually still feel really purposeful as a father. And that, because you're going to continue to inspire them, is because they're going to be seeing, wow, dad constantly is doing something that is really purposeful and meaningful. And they see that. So even though they don't need you to provide or protect, and they need their independence, actually, they're still getting inspired by you as a father, because you're doing something that is meaningful. You're giving back. You're doing
Right.
something that's bigger than you. You're contributing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you talk about masculinity a lot, Frank, and that's
Yeah.
something that's really been, big on my mind in the last year and a half, 2 years, as I see society almost kind of like downgrade the men's, role in society. and
Mm.
and and it's almost like they see something that's too masculine on social media, and they want to call him names, and oh, maybe you need to cut back on your hormones or testosterone or whatever. and
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously, we didn't really talk about discussing this, but I feel like masculinity is a major piece, and giving us the permission to be masculine, give us permission as men to be the strong voice, the strong example, all those different things. Do you feel like that's lacking with a lot of people that you coach, men that you coach with, of helping them understand the importance of masculinity?
Yes. And in some cases, they may understand the importance of masculinity and they may want it for themselves, but they don't know how to attain it. I think
Right,
that might be even more common than than men who don't see the value in masculinity at all, at least the ones that are coming to me. And I
right,
think that's pretty obvious because it's such a big part of my brand. Do I think, to your point, that there are a lot of guys out there, men and women, who don't value masculinity or think that it's simply a social construct? I do. And I think that that's really problematic because we actually need more noble leaders, exemplars who are as men who are stepping into
right,
their masculine energy in society now more than ever. More
right.
than ever, we fucking need it now. But in the through the scope of coaching, I get a lot of guys, and it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I get a lot of guys who come to me and they're like, I do want to step more into my masculine energy. My girlfriend, my wife, she says that, she's resentful because she needs to step into her masculine energy and she wants to step more into her feminine. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what she wants from me. I show up for her. I give her anything that she wants. I do anything for her. I'm like, I'll do anything for her. I'll sacrifice
Right,
for her. Whatever she says, I do. And I'm like, well, you could start by stopping that. Because
right,
that's not going to earn her respect. That's not living in your masculine. So I help break it down for them of what masculine virtues are, at least through, by my definition, what I believe they are.
yes,
You mentioned one actually earlier, courage. That's a big one.
right,
Courage, discipline, strength. And when I say strength, I don't just mean inner strength. I mean externally as well. I mean
right,
physical strength, virility, our voice. I think the external needs to match the internal. Temperance, being able to temper our emotions, ego control, emotional regulation, all that shit. Integrity, that we're actually good people, that we have a strong
right,
moral compass, that we're honest and we do the right thing and we're benevolent. To me, these are all the things that represent masculinity. And I think that it's knocked. I think it's knocked for a lot of reasons. Most of the time, I think it's knocked. It's usually by somebody who is deeply insecure about their
right,
own masculinity. They see you or they see me and they say, "Oh yeah, bro, why don't you just keep loading up on the testosterone?"
yeah,
I just think to myself, I remember when I was you, bro. I remember. I remember when I used to look at other masculine guys and I used to fucking hate them
right,
because deep down I was deeply insecure about my masculinity and they just made me feel inadequate. They
right,
highlighted everything that I was insecure about because I was
right,
just so what did I do instead? I rejected the idea of masculinity. I rejected it. And I was just like, I'm going to rebel against it because, and never admitting that it was
right.
because I felt inadequate about it, but because it's a social construct. It's bullshit. I think 90% of the time, I'm going to go even further. With men, at least, people who identify as men, 99% of the time, if they reject masculinity, it's because they're insecure about their own.
Right. I
Yeah.
agree with
Yeah. And I'm not
you.
afraid to say that. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's because they're deep down insecure about their own, or because they feel disenfranchised by masculinity or somebody in their life who represented masculinity who made them feel bad about themselves. Maybe their father, maybe an older brother, an uncle, or something like that on their journey, and then that made them feel bad about who they are. So then they reject the entire idea of masculinity, and that's only hurting themselves. Can
Right.
you live a life as a man without stepping into your masculine energy and still feel some sense of fulfillment? Probably. Probably. I can't think of how, but I'm sure we could find creative ways. I mean, we find ways to live as vegans. We find ways to live as carnivores. We find ways to adapt and sustain a lot of things. So probably, do I think it's the most fulfilling way to live as a man? No, not at all. Do I think it's having a big impact on society by not stepping into your masculine energy and really giving society what it needs? No, I don't. I think it's a cop out. I think it's irresponsible.
Right. I
Yeah.
know you mentioned the E word, and that's emotions. Us
Yeah.
men, I mean, I'm 48, and I like to be considered as a man's man, but a lot of times it's important for us to really do a good job of self-awareness. You talked about emotions and ego, and I know, again, I want you to be, someone that's listening to this that needs help in this issue as a coach. So I know we can't get into too much details of what you do with your clients, but how hard is that for men when they come to you and say, look, man, I'm checking my ego at the door. I don't understand my emotions, how to work through these different things. What are some of the little few tips that you try to help them realize what they need work on?
Yeah, so that's I love that question. The first thing that I typically will help guys with is their emotional literacy. So I help them understand how many different emotions there are, and how to identify certain emotions. A lot of guys, they're just like, isn't just like happy, sad, angry. I'm like, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and and then I help them identify certain things to raise their emotional awareness. So I
Right.
think it starts off with emotional literacy, which is understanding the different emotions. I actually have this wheel, and I certainly did not create it. I think I found it on Amazon. It's like this emotion wheel, of different emotions. It's all different colors. It looks like it belongs in a kindergarten classroom, but I love it. I find it incredibly effective and useful, because it has all these different emotions on it, the things that I wouldn't even think of. And it's just so layered of how specific the emotions can get. And I think that as we build our emotional literacy, then we're more equipped to be able to recognize different emotions that we're feeling and why. And that's the next step, which is emotional awareness, is recognizing when we're feeling something. So we want to recognize when we're feeling it, then we want to recognize what we're feeling. So it starts with when, what happens in your body. Do you start clenching your fist? Do you get tight up in your chest? What's going on? Something's changing in you. Okay, so this is a good opportunity for you to recognize you're feeling something. So
Right.
awareness starts with when. Next is what. Okay, let's try to identify what the feeling is. All right. And then after we identify what, okay, it's envy, let's say. Now let's identify why. Why are you feeling envy? And this is where we need to be really compassionate with ourselves. We have to get rid of any self judgments, because we got to be willing to talk about hard truths. We got to be willing to admit, I'm feeling envious. I'm feeling jealous. And I don't want to judge myself for that. I want to understand why. And then we have the opportunity to probe deeper and to get into the abyss and understand what happened that triggered this feeling. We go through that process, and then that empowers us to be able to make a decision about the action that follows. Rather than the action being driven by the emotion, now we've gone through this process of recognizing when we're feeling something, what we're feeling, why we're feeling it. We're honoring the emotion. We're not hiding it. We're not suppressing it. We're not ignoring it. We're honoring it, but we're not reacting to it. It puts us in a position of control. That's emotional regulation. It's a
Yeah.
process,
Yeah.
but it starts from very rudimentary, just understanding emotional words, and just increasing your emotional vocabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, and I bet you that's hard for men. We've been told all of our life to keep our emotions, inside, and you don't want to. But I can imagine. But I don't think, I'm not a coach, but I don't think they're not going to go to that next level unless they do that good self reflection and really, confess with themselves, this is an area that I need to work on. This is an issue that I have.
Totally.
You're not going to be able to take them to that next level until they do that good self-reflection and admit where they are.
I've said those exact words. I've
Yeah.
said those exact words to guys. I've said, I've taken you as far as I can take you. Now
Yeah.
the choice is yours, if you let me take you further or not. And
Right.
that depends exclusively on your willingness to get vulnerable, to be honest with yourself, and to go on a journey and to go even deeper into the abyss of who you are. But
Yeah.
if you're not willing to, I can't take you any farther. I've taken you as far as I can take you.
Yeah.
Said those exact words.
Yeah.
That maybe some clients listening who are just like, yep, he did. He
Yeah.
said that to me. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and it's crazy. Like I said, I'm not a professional coach. I just built a business that I had to work with a lot of leaders that really, I had to use some counseling skills that I never was taught. And I would call it, Paul, Frank, is let's get naked here.
There you go.
I mean,
Exactly.
let's just
Yeah.
get naked. I mean, not reality of us
But
getting
strip
naked,
the
but
bullshit
let's
away.
strip
Strip
it all
away
off.
the layers.
Yeah,
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 exactly. Take down the
yeah,
brick wall. Strip it
yeah,
all off. Yeah,
yeah.
let's
Because
get raw.
until they do that, we can't really see what we need help on. Yeah,
Amen.
yeah.
Yes.
I know also one of my favorite pieces that I've watched you do, you talked about the three biggest mistakes that men make when trying to cultivate purpose in their life. And you talk about, free time, you talk about confusing purpose with passion and not wanting to try new things. I know the reason that related to me again is I'm putting myself in that midlife class
Mhm.
of people that you really speak to the most. And that's the
Yeah.
reason I wanted to have you on, and I dealt with those things. And I mean, I was that person when I launched a new company, 6 years ago, 42-year old. A lot of people would think you're crazy, man. You got the money in the bank, you got the freedom on the ranch. Why in the
Mhm.
world are you starting? But I look back and think, thank God I had that courage to do that. And how could you speak to the men about these three biggest mistakes that they make?
So a lot of us, time is money, and a lot of us are even more latched on to our time with clenched fists until our knuckles are white, than we are even our money, and we don't want to give up any of it. So what I say to guys who are too latched onto their free time is, if you want to prioritize you, if you want to work on yourself, if you want to prioritize your personal development, excuse me, and if you want to cultivate purpose, you got to be willing to sacrifice some of your free time. You got to be willing to invest some of your time into doing that. Not all of it, but you got to be willing to invest some of it. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that guys make when trying to cultivate purpose, is they think that they can have everything. They
Right.
think that they can have all their free time and they don't have to sacrifice any of it, and find, as you mentioned in the beginning of this of our jam session, what did you call it? It's not hacks. It's not life
Cheat
hacks.
codes.
Cheat codes. Yes.
Yeah.
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 Is that they're looking for the cheat codes. They're
Yeah.
looking for the cheat codes, and they could hang that shit the fuck up.
Right.
You're not going to find any cheat codes when cultivating purpose. So that's a big one, is that we have to simply accept that you can have all the free time in the world and be purposeless,
Yeah.
or you could be a little bit busy and have a little less free time and feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
You choose.
Yeah.
You choose. So that's one. The other one is
I will say that
yeah, go ahead.
say this, Frank, real fast is I look back at what I thought was my happiest times in the life when I had a lot of free time.
Mm.
And I look back and think, man, I was miserable inside. I probably would not have admitted it,
Yeah.
but I look at my schedule now, as far as, running the company, helping people daily, my coaching my boys still, helping other kids that are less privileged that I try to help often, and my day, like from early morning till night, is booked up. And man, I go to sleep and I sleep like a baby. I feel like $1,000,000 because I feel like I contributed. So nothing against what, or nothing. I just wanted to add that for these men listening is you're not going to be happy just because you have free time and watching a ball game or Netflix.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not going to bring happiness. Happiness, the only way to happiness is truly bringing service to other people.
I agree a lot with what you just said, and it's also kind of a perfect segue into the second part, which is confusing purpose with passion,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that could be interchangeable with confusing purpose with pleasure. So when you had all that free time, that was probably when your life was maybe the most pleasurable.
Right.
But pleasure is not the same feeling as purpose.
No.
You could have a fucked up day of really hard work and be like, "Yo, I'm exhausted. I'm drained. This was hard. I feel challenged, but I also am so fulfilled
Right.
because I did some of the most purposeful things that I could possibly do in this day." You're going to sleep better that night than the
Oh
day
yeah.
that you didn't have to do anything and you just had pleasures all day. Pleasures are
Oh yeah.
nice, but they're not long lasting.
No.
Yeah, that's not a lasting
It
high.
don't bring
Purpose
value to no
lasts a long
one.
time. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's the other mistake is a lot of guys confuse passion with purpose. Is they're just like, yo, my purpose is the gym. I crush it when I'm at the gym. I feel alive when I'm at the gym. And I'm like, and how is that contributing to anybody else? What kind of impact are you having? How does that have lasting value? Now, if they tell me I post videos on social media inspiring other men, okay, cool. There you go.
Right.
That's the answer. But if not, and if all they're doing is just posting selfies or not posting at all, but they're just crushing it at the gym and that's their purpose, and I will challenge them. I will say,
Right.
what's the purpose in that? That's
Right.
passion. You're
Right.
passionate about it. That's not to be conflated with purpose.
Yeah.
And what's the third one? I already forgot.
Yeah. Not wanting to try new things. Yeah.
Not wanting to try. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Guys who don't. That's courage. Not wanting
Yeah.
to step out of their comfort zone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not wanting to. You got to be willing to step out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
If you want to cultivate purpose in your life, you have to be willing to try new things.
Yeah.
This is where I become. Oh, this is where I become a motherfucker to some of my clients. They get mad at me because I push them and I say,
Yeah.
"Did you do what I suggested? Are you trying it? Why not?" And I get on them, and they feel really challenged sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they even feel probably a little bit backed into a corner. But I remind them, "This is what you told me you wanted.
Yeah.
How
How
bad do you
much
want it?"
how much of that, Frank, do you think, even at like midlife crisis, how much of us are we still worried about what other people think? I mean, do
Oh,
you think, because like I had a switch happen to me about 5 years ago, and I won't get into the story, but I'm like, screw it. I'm going to live my life regardless. And that was a big moment in my life. I mean, I've always had success. I've always, to some point didn't really care what other people thought, but deep down I'm like, oh man, I don't want to let this person down, or what are they really thinking, and
right.
that type of thing. But about 5 years ago I said, this is my life. I'm gonna live my life.
Yeah. And I've heard that before. I remember before I turned 40, somebody, a friend of mine, a peer of mine, she told me, she said, something happens when you turn 40. You just stop giving a fuck. It's an
Yeah.
energy. And I was like, oh, okay. And as far as I thought, I was like, I think I kind of already achieved that in a lot of ways in my 30s. But to your point, or to answer, I don't know, was it a question or,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How
yeah,
many of these people, we're talking about these three things, and the last thing is not wanting to try new things. So maybe it's I've got a guy that's listening to the podcast, and he's been a commercial real estate agent for like 30 something years for the same company. And I didn't even know he listened to my podcast. And about 2 months ago, he come to me and he said, hey man, I just want to let you know, you inspired me to now be my own broker and to start my own company. And I really congratulated him and will support him any way I can. But how many of those men don't try new things because they're worried about, what if I do this and I fail? What if I do this and other people are judging me?
yeah, yeah. And I think that, yeah, I'm remembering what you had said. You had said, how much does this come up in midlife? Is it still a thing
Yeah.
or is it just when we're younger? I do think that, yeah, I was on the trajectory to answer it a moment ago and then I forgot. So the reason why I brought up my friend is she said that, yeah, I remember her saying to me, when something happens when we turn 40. I do think that there's some truth to that, that when we get into our 40s, a lot of us, when we hit midlife, we do start caring a little bit less. We've probably heard a lot of people say that, like something happens as we get older.
Right.
And then when we get into our 60s, 70s, and 80s, even more so, we just
Right.
don't care about anything. But yes, there are still guys who are
Yeah.
people pleasers. Yes, we do still hold on to something like, well, I don't care what other people think of me necessarily, but I don't want to let this person down,
Right.
or I don't want to disappoint my dad, or I want to make sure I'm liked at work. I
Yeah.
don't want to I don't want to stir the pot too much by saying this unpopular opinion. And those are all little ways that we are still holding on to this belief of, I need to be liked by others, or I need other people's approval. Even little things like, I don't want to assert myself. I don't want to set that boundary because that might come across too strong. Yeah, I'm worried about how they might feel. They might feel like offended by me. If we dig deep into to what's going on there, we find, okay, you're still concerned with what other people think. You're
Yeah.
prioritizing somebody else's feelings over yours, over your needs, over
Right.
your boundaries.
Right.
So, yes, I think that for a lot of us, those changes happen organically. It improves, it gets better, but it's not necessarily the best that it can be until we actually dig deep and we start really taking a look at ourselves, and we go on a self-development journey, and we start probing, and we start finding these other little areas of life where it's like, oh, I'm doing it there. I didn't realize it. I thought I didn't
Right.
care anymore. I thought I was being my most authentic self, but no, I do still care a little bit. I'm
Yeah.
still doing this, or I'm not doing this, or I'm a little insecure about this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to there's a story that I heard when I was young, and I don't know if you've heard it, but it says if you continue to try to please all the people around you, you'll lose your ass. And it's basically a story of a father and a son taking a donkey to town, and they went through the first village, and the dad was riding the donkey, the son was leading it, and they
Yeah.
said, "Oh, you should feel bad. Your son is 12 years old. He's pulling the donkey. You're riding the donkey." So they switched. And then the next village, they're like, "Oh, you should feel bad. Your dad is pulling the donkey. He's older than you, and you're riding a donkey." So then they got to the next village, and they said, "I can't believe that poor donkey. Y'all need to carry that donkey." So they started carrying this donkey, went over a bridge and lost balance, and the donkey fell over the bridge and died
Mm.
into the water. And the moral of the story is, if you try to please everyone, you're going to lose your ass. And I think a lot of people through that midlife crisis, I went through it. I think they do that a lot.
And I think it's, I don't know where the quote obviously comes from the story, but it feels like it's also, it has a double meaning,
Yeah,
in terms of like lose your ass. Cause I'm thinking we do lose our identity.
yeah,
If you keep trying to please
yeah,
everybody, you're going to lose your ass. It means you're going to lose who you are,
yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
absolutely.
And then in the work that I do, and you probably can identify with this too, because you're a leader, as leaders, it's especially important that we don't get wrapped up in trying to please people as leaders. Because
Yeah,
if we're not pissing somebody off, we're not
right,
saying shit.
yeah,
We're not saying anything valuable or
right,
prolific or impactful if
right.
somebody's not getting offended by it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I've told everyone, people's asked me different times, and I know you get this asked a lot as well. How do you deal with, people attacking you and all this? I just tell them I smile, because that
Yeah.
means I'm doing something good.
Right.
If you're not having issues in life and everyone's always patting you on the back, then you're probably not doing something good.
I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if
yeah,
people are talking, that's good. That means I'm doing something good.
yeah,
It's when there's no talking, that's when I'm just like, oh, this one didn't hit. But if
yeah.
people are pissed at me, I'm like, okay, they're talking. This one landed. This one landed.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
that's good stuff. Well, I know this episode has been phenomenal, Frank. I'm going to have you back on and talk about more of these issues, but just give me a recap again about menopause and what you would really, help the audience with, of coming out of a funk, and like what you started. You hadn't even got there yet. It's not done. You're not dead. Turn
That's
up
the
your
big,
game. Let's go level up.
yeah. That's the biggest thing. I would say, is to start by recognizing that you have what potentially could be your greatest years ahead of you.
Right.
That's big. And then the three things that I would say we could do in terms of taking action, maybe four. Let's see. So one, addressing the physical side of it. Go to your physician, dude. Get your testosterone checked. Get a
Yep.
lipid profile. Make sure everything's in order. I hear this all the time. So in my coaching program, depending on what kind of customized program somebody wants with me to go one-on-one, I will often offer like a full spectrum experience where they will get included in their journey with me, a session with a physician who's going to send in lab work for them, and they're going to get their testosterone levels checked, their a full lipid profile, and then a breakdown of what everything is. And what I hear from a lot of these guys is, I'm amazed at how many guys tell me, oh, my GP never mentioned anything about getting my testosterone levels checked. I'm like, how old are you? And they're like 46. I'm like, what? Like that? Why? So that's one, is talk to your GP. Talk to your
Yeah.
GP and be like, hey, listen, I want to get everything checked. I'm getting older.
And make sure
So
they do a full panel too.
a full panel,
Yes.
exactly. Second, when it comes to the emotional and psychological changes, assess your accomplishments, learn your values. Whether you do it because you look it up online, whether you do it because you pick up my book, Crafting Masculinity, I believe it's in chapter 3, the values assessment, or you do it because you hit me up and say, Frank, I want a comprehensive values assessment with you. Learn what your freaking values are. If you
Right.
Google it and you find a BuzzFeed quiz, start there, but learn your values and make sure that you're living in alignment with them. That's going to help big time. That's going to help you identify purpose. And then lastly, I would say invest in yourself,
Yeah.
prioritize you, invest in your self development. You said it yourself, man. You work with a coach. I work with a coach.
Yeah.
I will work with a coach for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
As long as this is functioning, I will work with a coach for the rest of my life. Sure, there might be a season where I'm not actively working with a coach. There might be seasons here and there, but pretty much for the rest of my life, I plan to have somebody in my corner, a mentor. And it's because I prioritize me, I prioritize my growth, I understand the value of investing in myself, and I want one of my biggest values is self mastery.
Right.
So and I want to keep growing, and I believe in my self development. So as well as I do, coaches bring out the best in us. They push us beyond the bounds of what we believe is possible. So they're always going to push us harder than we push ourselves. And they also point out, good coaches, our blind spots.
Right.
They tell us when we're full of shit. They say things that other people aren't willing to say. And if you want to grow, that's the way to do it, is to have a coach in your corner or some sort of helping professional. So find the right mentor. So 3 things: get your labs, get your testosterone labs, learn your values, invest in yourself, and find the right mentor. You do those 3 things, you can make midlife you can make it the best chapter of your life.
I'm a testimony of that, Frank. I 100% believe you have delivered the best episode we've ever had here on Hard Truth Podcast. How
Thank you,
can
brother.
people get in touch with you? Let's say they want to hire you as a coach. They want to just follow your content for a while before to get to know you better. What's the best way to follow you?
So I try to post every day on Instagram. I'm on TikTok as well, but I'll admit I'm more active on Instagram. So you could look up Vignolagram. It's my last name and then Graham.
Spell that out for us if you don't care.
Sure, no problem. V is in Victor, Ignola, and then Graham, Gram, one word,
Okay.
Vignolagram. So find me on Instagram, follow. And if you want to go straight to my website and you want to book an introduction call with me and have a conversation about working together one-on-one or in a group dynamic, go to lifecoachingny.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Livecoachingny.com.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Yes,
Frank,
sir.
it's been an honor and a privilege to have you on today's episode. I hope that all of you enjoyed the Hard Truth podcast today, and share this with a friend or family member. Leave us a review. And my buddy from New Jersey delivered the goods today, Frank Paul Vignola. Thank you for being on. Self-mastery coach for over 12 years and author. Go grab his book, Crafting Masculinity. Thank you guys for joining us.